Hey foodies, welcome into another one. We have a non-Dead by Daylight video today. That is because I want to break down the Scream series and I want to rank all 5 films going from my favorite to my least favorite. I've been meaning to do some non-DVD content for a while, and keep in mind that back in the day, I did a Conjuring films ranking, so this time I want to go to probably my favorite horror franchise and do Scream. And it's my favorite for a few reasons, one of those being that I just don't think they've put out a truly horrible one yet. I think most of them are above average to far above average. And also, it's the earliest horror film I have any recollection of watching. I'm not saying I didn't watch one before it, but I have no recollection of anything before watching 96's Scream. And I do love it as a film. The whole series is great, so without wasting any time, let's get into it and start with number 1, Scream, 1996. This one is iconic for a reason. This was the shot in the arm that horror needed, and it holds up incredibly well today. It created a perfect formula for being funny, smart, and scary all at the same time. And unlike some self-aware films, this one never overdoes the meta humor, despite dancing playfully along that line. While I'm going to avoid doing a scene-by-scene breakdown for these films, I do have to say that this has one of the best opening scenes in all of horror, if not all of cinema. Advertising Drew Barrymore, who was at the time a pretty big name, as the main character, and then killing her off immediately was a really clever idea. The film was really well aware of genre tropes and played with them from the outset, so Craven and Williamson gave us the quote-unquote final girl battle right at the start of the film, and in a move that must have shocked audiences, the final girl lost. That's crazy. That is such a cool idea, and I wish I could go into it and watch it again not knowing what comes, because I didn't know the first time I watched it. Oh man, it was shocking. It was a great opening scene and a really strong start, not just for a movie, but for a franchise. We then find out that Neve Campbell's Sidney Prescott is our actual final girl, and my goodness, I know there are people who love Laurie Strode, Sally Hardesty, Nancy Thompson, all of that. But for my money, Sidney is the slasher genre's best final girl by a country mile, which is, by the way, longer than a city mile. The job Campbell does here is absolutely insane. I don't think people realize how tough it is for any actor to play traits like naivete without annoying the audience. I mean, yelling at stupid characters is a horror staple by this point. But Campbell delivers a performance that is earnest and endearing. You feel for Sidney during her struggles, and you definitely want her to win. The supporting cast is great here as well. Courtney Cox is great as Gale Weathers. It's nice to see a main protagonist who is allowed to just be a jerk, to just be a pretty bad person. And sure, she softens as the series goes on, but especially in 1 and 2, she's as cutthroat as they come, and I really like that about her. I also enjoy David Arquette as Dewey Riley in this film more than I do in some of the others, so minor spoilers for the rest of the video, but this is the only film outside of one other where I truly love and enjoy Dewey's presence. I know he's a popular character, but, for me personally, sometimes it doesn't always work. But in this one, Arquette is great as a young officer who's in way over his head, like the time when he won the WCW World Heavyweight Championship, by the way. And his romance with Gale is equal parts goofy and sweet. I enjoyed it. Of course, I think this one just had the best side characters in the entire series. Henry Winkler, the Fonz, is extremely fun as Principal Hembry. Jamie Kennedy is legendary as Randy Meeks. And W. Earl Brown is great as a cameraman whose name is not Jesus. Of course, we can't talk about a slasher film without mentioning the killer, so let's do that. In the case of Scream, it's not a singular killer, but 2 killers. A twist so good that literally every other Scream movie, except for Scream 3, has aped it. Even the TV show did it. Kind of. It's hard to pick who I like more between Skeet Ulrich's Billy Loomis and Matthew Lillard's Stu Macher, because both men are perfectly cast for the roles they play and add a great deal of heart to what could have been kind of cliched characters. Billy is the serious one and Stu's the jokester, but both actors add way more depth to the roles than just those simple labels. Ulrich brings this debonair charm to Billy that makes you hope he's not the killer, despite the overwhelming evidence that he is. And then Lillard does a great job of adding humanity to a character that starts off as zany and gets even wilder from there. Scream would not be what it is without the first 2 ghost faces. Ghostly faces, ghost face sight, whatever plural. The plurality of Ghostface. And even today, I think they stand as the best duo to ever don the Scream mask. Kevin Williamson also deserves a lot of credit for what is ultimately a very sharp script. As I mentioned before, I really love how he dances around campiness and meta humor without ever fully indulging in those things. The film isn't afraid to have fun, but it also knows when to take things seriously, which can be generally chalked up as a win for the screenplay. It's a shame Williamson hasn't written more films than what he has, given the quality of the Scream franchise and the TV series The Following, because he's clearly got great writing chops. Of course, if we're going to talk about the hands that guided the project from behind the camera, we have got to take some time to praise the dearly departed Wes Craven. It's easy, very easy, to get caught up in hyperbole, especially when speaking about deceased individuals that we admire. But I'll say it. Craven is one of the most important people in the history of horror. While the list of horror greats is far too long to recount, Craven stands nearly alone in that he gave us not one, but two iconic horror villains. The other, as you likely know, is Freddy Krueger. And while I love a great deal of Craven's work, this film is him at his best. The pacing of the film is fantastic and proves that he's just as adept at cutting together a film as Ghosty is at cutting apart victims. Overall, a fantastic first entry. The series never matched this again, but it wasn't really realistic to expect them to. This first film is the best one by quite a margin, and I love it dearly. At number 2, we have the first controversial placement. I'm putting Scream 4. Now, I have to say this. This film has the very best Ghostface duo outside of the first film. Jill is an absolute psychopath, and it's obvious that Emma Roberts had a lot of fun chewing scenery as something of a mustache-twirling bad guy. As for Rory Culkin, he does a great job portraying one of cinema's more violent, nice guy characters, before talk of incels had really gone mainstream. He's also a pretty underrated Ghostface in that he kills 9 victims, while Jill only kills 2. People tend to not like his character because he's kind of pathetic, but that was 100% intentional, and I think he's closer to a real serial killer than most in the series. As for the main cast, Neve Campbell is great here again, and I think that David Arquette is debatably at his best in this one. Courtney Cox is fine, but there were scenes where it felt like she was kinda checked out. Thankfully, the supporting cast is pretty good here. I enjoyed the performances of most everybody in this film, and of course, I agree that Hayden Panettiere stole the show as Kirby. My fingers are definitely crossed for her to return in a future Scream. One nice thing about this one is that the gore was really kicked up a notch for this film, which I know that will turn some viewers away, but I'm a big fan of. I like gory horror films for the most part. And again, Charlie is an absolute beast, and the way he tears into his victims is very Ripper-esque. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if the Olivia kill scene was inspired by the real-life Mary Jane Kelly crime scene in London. But there's no proof of that, so take this as the unsubstantiated theory that it is. I'm just saying there is a resemblance there. Overall, Scream 4 holds a very special place in my heart as one of the 2010s truly great slasher flicks, and I don't feel like this movie, or its killers, gets the love it deserves. Also, it's got one of my favorite scenes in all of Scream, when Charlie is killing his buddy. I forget his buddy's name, actually. I think Ronnie or something like that. And he says, wait, no, you can't kill me, I'm gay. And Charlie, who knows him very well, kind of tilts his head like, no, you're not. No, you can't lie to me. I know you. It's a funny little scene that once you know it's Charlie behind the mask is actually made funnier. Next, we have Scream 5, which I'm going to call Scream 5, even though it was just marketed as being Scream. There's already a Scream. I'm not going along with this anymore, right? We already have Halloween and Halloween and Halloween 2018. We're not going to do this with every series, even though some have said that that's what Scream was lampooning by doing that. I don't know. Either way, let's get into it. It's controversy time. So I rather liked Scream 5. Yes, even more than I did Scream 2. While there were certainly things I didn't love about the film, I found it to be an overall good addition to the franchise and an enjoyable Scream experience. The fact that it ended up as good as it did is something of a miracle too, considering the struggles other franchises have had with introducing a new generation of protagonists to an existing franchise. For whatever reason, I'm going to put up pictures of Star Wars, Gears of War, and the MCU. Again, no real reason. Melissa Barea and Jenna Ortega are fantastic as the franchise's new faces. Given Ortega's explosion into the mainstream, it will be interesting to see if Scream can keep her around for the long haul, but she really delivers in this movie. Courtney Cox is much more locked in this one than she was in 4, and I'm really glad that she got to have something of a return to form here. Arquette and Neve Campbell are fine enough, but I do have some issues with their performances. Neve seemed kind of tired at times, but then again, that's likely what she was going for, given that Sydney's been through this 4 times already, so I don't know. I guess it's natural that she would treat the situation with something of an eye roll, at least at first. As for Arquette, Grizzled Dewey just didn't work for me. This movie kind of Last Jedi'd him in that it took the franchise's most hopeful, optimistic character and made him somebody that I hardly recognized. This wasn't Luke Skywalker levels of character assassination, I should add, but I didn't love it. The supporting cast in this film, it was kind of just one big bowl of meh. I thought Jack Quaid and Mikey Madison were fine as the killers, but they didn't do a whole lot to move the needle. They certainly weren't terrible, please don't get me wrong there, but I would be shocked if they were in anyone's top 5 ghost faces. The young adult characters were fine, I guess. I'm hoping for more personality from them going forward, and thankfully most of them survived, so we do get the opportunity to see them in another film. It's a shame we won't get to see more from Kyle Gallner going forward, because man, this guy just can't seem to escape the nightmare. Also, props to Sonia Amar's Lib for going out with a bang in what was probably the most fun kill of the movie. Scream 5, which again I refuse to drop the numeral from, is a pretty good movie that did just enough to reboot the franchise for a new sequel series. It has its warts, but mostly I thought it was a pretty good time. Oh, and before I go, I've got to say it. Wow. Skeet Ulrich has aged extremely gracefully. The dude looks great in this movie, and it was really cool seeing him back, even if it was just kind of as nostalgia bait. I also don't mind that he helped his family member in the final, climax of the film, because some people have been like, oh, but he was evil, why would he do that? Well, yeah, he was evil, but his evil stemmed from loving family, so it kind of makes sense that he would help his family member in a dire situation like that. Overall, though, great to see Skeet back. Next, we have Scream 2 coming in at the number 4 slot. And I know that a lot of people hold this one up as their favorite or second favorite Scream film, but I just can't agree. That's not to say I don't like it, mind you, but I think it has more flaws than fans tend to let on. One thing that wasn't flawed was the effort put forth by the main cast, however. Neve Campbell gives a great outing as a wiser but more fragile version of Sydney, while Courtney Cox has her best outing yet. Some of the romance scenes between Gale and Dewey were a little hard to watch, but she's really good otherwise. And I don't want to keep you here all day, so I'll just save time and say that I really enjoyed the performances from Liev Schreiber, Jerry O'Connell, Dwayne Martin, and pretty much everyone in this film. When it comes down to it, Scream 2 is a pretty good movie that's held back by 3 huge flaws. The first has to do with Dewey, who I think is possibly at his worst here. The limp they gave him was a strange decision, and the fact that it just disappears in the third one is absolutely hilarious. You stab and you get a limp. You get stabbed a second time and you lose the limp. I love it. Medicine. How about that? Arquette doesn't exactly bring his best fastball here either, and mostly just seems kind of confused most of the time. There's also that one moment where he tells Gale off, and it's supposed to be this big cathartic smackdown, but instead it just comes off as something that a middle schooler would create in their own head after being picked on by the mean girl. One of those conversations you revisit and is like, oh, I could have said this. And I'm not trying to imply that Dewey is terrible in this film, but he's definitely not at his best, and it shows. My next big issue is Jamie Kennedy, which is not to say that his performance was bad, but really the opposite. Kennedy was a revelation in the original movie, and it was fair to expect another great showing here, which is exactly what he gave. But because the original scripts were leaked, the film was reworked, and Randy ended up being killed off rather hastily despite surviving in the original drafts of the film. This was a decision made purely for shock value, and I expect much, much more out of the duo of Williamson and Craven. Randy Meeks will always go down as a case of wasted potential, and if I'm being honest, that makes me sad. My last big issue with the film is the Ghostface killers, or more specifically, one of them. Mickey Loomis was fine enough. I love Timothy Olyphant in every role he plays, and this is no exception. Olyphant does really well to switch from lovable goofball to psychotic murderer in the blink of an eye, and his charm really elevates what was a pretty underwritten character. I also love that he basically admits point blank to being the killer after the attack where Derek gets injured, and most audience members were so caught up in his charisma that they just didn't really process what he said. Why did Derek go back in that house? But no, my issue with this film is not having to do with Timothy Olyphant, it's not with Mickey, it has to do with Debbie Salt, or Miss Loomis as we come to know her. I don't have an issue with how Laurie Metcalf plays the character. In fact, I think she's a rather good actor. I just didn't think her reveal was satisfying at all. Sure, she's given enough scenes that we registered her as a possible killer, but absolutely nothing was done to subtly enforce the concept of the killer being connected to Billy, outside of the fact that it's another ghost face. This could have been a really fun plot twist, but instead it feels more akin to the whole sibling I've never mentioned trope, and that's a bit of a bummer. Also, if I can delve a bit into hater territory here, the lunchroom scene where Derek sings to Sydney is one of the hardest things I have ever watched. And it could have worked if they played it off as everybody else finding it strange, but the fact that everybody seemed to think it was cool that this strange man in his overly large khakis was standing up to sing in the middle of lunch, standing up on the desk, no, get rid of that whole scene. I get secondhand embarrassment from that one, and that is not what I watch Scream for. And lastly, and I guess by default least, is number 5, Scream 3. Now, let's get the biggest issue with this one out of the way early, that being Ghostface. So the voice changer is ridiculous sci-fi technology that not only has it never existed, it probably will never exist. I don't know. I mean, can you imagine a world where we can just perfectly mimic anyone's voice to say anything we want on the fly like that? Not by processing, not anything, just on the fly. It's insane. Now, granted, I'm a big dummy. Who knows? Maybe that's a thing that will exist one day. I don't know. But either way, that was dumb. And Roman being the mastermind actually works. You know, the mastermind behind everything related to Scream, it works to undermine the original film, which is one of the cardinal sins of a sequel. Scott Foley does what he can with the role, but Roman just isn't good enough of a character to work himself out of the holes in the script. If a Scream film is only as good as its Ghostface, then there should be no surprise that I put this one last. All of that being said, I actually kind of love this movie. I love the campiness of the whole thing. The death scenes are often convoluted and ridiculous, but that makes it fun to rewatch, especially that one scene where they're using the fax machine and the gas leak, and oh my goodness, just ridiculous, so dumb, but I love it. Neve Campbell and David Arquette seemed pretty done by this point, but I actually did think that this was likely Courtney Cox's best outing in the entire franchise. And I also really enjoyed the performance of Parker Posey, who works great as a begrudging ally to Gale. As for the rest of the cast, Jenny McCarthy, Matt Kiesler, Dion Richmond, they add almost nothing to the film, and they serve as little more than fuel for the body count. It was nice to see Liev Schreiber back in the series, but I'm sad they killed him off in such a dumb way. That being said, I have been looking for years for one of those 100% Cotton tees, the show that he has, so if anybody knows of one's existence, please do let me know in the comments below. Adding to the total randomness of the film, Jay and Silent Bob make a random cameo, which, sure. I've never seen Jay and Silent Bob, or Clerks, I think is what they're from. But, you know, it doesn't really make sense that they were there anyway. Maybe it does if you've seen the film, but as somebody who's not a fan, it didn't really add much. Thankfully, Carrie Fisher's cameo was handled much better and makes me smile every time. It's always a good day when the best Disney princess stops by. Jamie Kennedy is great in what he's given here. Admittedly, I mean, look, it's clear that they regret killing him off, but as far as ways of bringing him back, it was actually pretty in character that he would make a video like that, and he was really good, so I'm sad that we don't get to see him in 4, 5, and 6. You know, overall, pretty funny. And the last thing I want to say about this film is that Patrick Warburton, Joe from Family Guy, Kronk from The Emperor's New Groove, for those unaware, is in this film, and guys, he's just glorious. He chews up every scene he's in, and my cousin and I still say, "Hey, Dewdrop, listen here, Dewdrop," to each other on a semi-regular basis. If for no other reason, watch Scream 3 for a very enjoyable outing from Warburton, because he really does add to the film. But that's gonna do it for me. That is my list. Now, for those of you curious, you might say, okay, but where would the MTV series factor in here? I would have put it in the last place slot. I did not love it. I thought that the mask design was cool, and if people are so inclined, I would do a breakdown of it at some point, but my general takeaway is I didn't think it was very good. It was a show made for MTV, and that was apparent. But these are all just my opinions. What are your opinions? Where would you rank the films? And feel free to throw the show in there if you'd like to. Maybe even separate it by seasons, because there were 2 seasons with, I think, 4 different ghost faces. So I would love to read that below and know how you feel about it. And how do you feel about Scream 6? Are you looking forward to it? Are you looking forward to... I think they are just calling this one Scream 6. Maybe I'm wrong, but how do you feel about it? Are you excited? Do you think it's going to be as good as the others? That's going to do it, though. I hope you've enjoyed this one. I hope you enjoyed some non-DBD content. Please do make sure you like and subscribe. And until next time, I have been Das Food. Bye, friends.
I've been dreaming on in my head like I've seen it. A life worth living is a life with meaning. I'll do what I love till my heart stops beating. I'm feeding this demon. Got a taste, can't erase bitterness in my